And so I'm sitting in for Tom today. Tom and his wife Susan are in Fort Myers, Florida. And so Lorraine, for once, shush. Yes. Anyway, so I'm standing in for Tom. As you know, Jim Peeler broke his arm. I think he's out of the hospital and staying with his son. So hopefully they'll relieve me of this duty in next time. But anyway, here I am. So I'll kick off the meeting, and I'll drag it out because Curtis here is just started eating. So I'll prolong the introductions as much as possible. And in fact, I will tell a joke actually. But I thought we'd do that.
I may better get up and speak then, rather.
Well, okay. So here's the joke. You know that St. Peter stands there at the pearly gates, welcoming people in. You see, or not. And so one day he was there guarding the pearly gates, and two of these disheveled people showed up and wearing hoods, and their pants were hanging down so you could see their underwear, which is quite fashionable these days. And so he looks at them and he shakes his head and he says, well, I better go check with God to see if we can let these people in. So he goes over and there's a conference, and God said, well, of course, we let everyone in, we won't discriminate. So he goes back to the pearly gates, and they notices that they've gone. So he goes back to God and he said, well, those people, you know, something's happened. They've gone. What do you mean, those disheveled people? No, the pearly gates. Anyway, that's my joke. Anyway, so John, you can fire up the. So anyway, so welcome to the. I'm reading from Tom's script, so if I go astray, you know. Anyway, so welcome to the College of Complexes. This is the 443rd meeting since we started down here in Dallas, 2009. Of course, as you know, it originated in Chicago, and so we often, I know we still do business with Chicago from time to time. So we put on a different speaker each week. So our speaker must be for or against something. And so we give our speaker 1 hour for the presentation. And so if anyone interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupting person that the rule of the club is there's only one fool at a time speaking. And so anyway, that's one of our rules. This is followed by questions from the speaker and question and answer period. Usually that goes on for about another hour or so. And so we want questions, real questions, and not speeches. And thus this is followed by remarks and rebuttals. So if you want to get up and rebut what the speaker says, you have 5 minutes. Sometimes if the speaker is really eloquent, we might give him another 3 seconds or so, but that's about it. And so that's the, and then in the end, once all the rebuttals have dried out, then the speaker gets up and he can say the last word. And so anyway, before we go any further, the time is now for, does anybody have any announcements?
Where's that?
Announcements?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yes, come on. It's dangerous though.
Yeah, really too many words. Dallas Philosopher's Forum is meeting this Tuesday, which is what, 19, 20, 21, 22, 22nd. 22nd at 7:30 at the El Phoenix off of Skillman and Adelia. If you show up early, you can get dinner and enjoy some scintillating conversation with other intelligent people. And the speaker is talking about death. So it's very likely going to be from an atheist perspective. So just wanted to let you know that's what's going on.
People are real nice.
So let me say something about Curtis here. I'll read from the script. So the name of the speaker, as you can see, is Curtis Muldrow, LTC, retired from the US Army. He's a veteran. And his topic tonight is how to deal with the attacks on democracy. And he will show how the Republican Party, political conservatives, white evangelicals, and are doing everything possible to undermine democracy. He argues that the power grab by Republican state legislatures in North Carolina, Michigan, and Wisconsin to limit the incoming Democratic administration powers are a classic example of ruthless attempts to maintain white male dominance and white supremacy. Curtis argues out that extreme gerrymandering and racist voter ID laws by Republican state legislators are further examples. He concludes that in order for democracy to survive, poor and working class Americans must realize that the Republican Party is corrupt, only concerned about the super wealthy class. Americans must realize that the Republican Party is corrupt. So no one else counts. And so the working people must act together across racial and economic lines to reverse and correct this situation. So, Curtis, are you ready?
About as ready as I'm going to be. Now that we've got the temperature high enough in here.
It's pretty hot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you get over that one? Without, yeah. You're okay.
And I want to say from the outset, don't hate anybody. I love everyone in here, so I know that's some tough subjects to kind of deal with. And I think for too long we have discussed some things in private that we should have the maturity, adulthood, to be able to come together, coming from divergent backgrounds, and discuss some sensitive issues. We really can't deal with some things that's going on in the present and divorce them from their historical context. You know, some things really hadn't been dealt with, and there's some remnants of an old system that need to be. But today I just want to talk about the corruption that I see in the Republican Party. And when I say Republican, I'm mainly talking about conservatives. It used to be that conservatives aligned themselves with the Democrat Party, who were Dixiecrats, Democrats. They were the ones who created Jim Crow and segregation. They weren't so much Democrats as they were conservatives. And during that reign of Jim Crow and segregation and all of the retaliation of ending slavery, things like that, Democrats were that party in the South who were Dixiecrats and conservatives. And what African Americans could vote, the few that could, they usually voted Republicans. Now, as one of our speakers has said in the past, the Republican Party was founded in about 1855 by a group of French communists. I'm not so sure how many Republicans know that. It used to be they were the party of Lincoln that was more sensitive to the civil rights and the struggles for human rights and dignities of African Americans, and that's why the majority of African Americans voted for Republicans and voted against Democrats who were conservative. So whenever we use in the Democrat-Republican term, to me, in my opinion, it really doesn't capture the heart of the issues. It's conservative versus liberals. Now, back during a century ago, both parties were pretty racist and white supremacy. That was the dominant. That was the dominant attitude in our country. And what I want to point out at the beginning, and why I mentioned white evangelicals, the Democrat Party, conservative Democrat Party, responsible for Jim Crow and segregation, their largest constituents were conservative white Christians. the largest voting bloc was conservative white Christians. And I frequently hear people like Dr. Jeffries and others want to be so altruistic toward the African American community and say 20 million babies have been aborted here and this. And Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood to attack and kill African Americans. I haven't been able to find one conservative white Christian or Southern Baptist who stood up and spoke out against Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood organization at the time.
That's going right into the camera. That's
okay.
Let me
Who spoke out?
adjust that.
It's still in the camera.
Yeah,
It's in the eyes also.
You're gonna have to rotate it.
right. I'll adjust it here.
Yeah.
I'll try it.
That's the one
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you. But as I was saying, I searched in vain to try to find one conservative white Christian, a white evangelical, who stood up at the time and condemned Margaret Sanger, who's a vowed white supremacist and a strong supporter of Confederate flag and Confederate statues. I searched in vain to find one that condemned it, showed some concern that black lives mattered just as much as white lives, which in the minds of people then, they didn't. Otherwise, they would have condemned it and stopped it, but no one gave a hoot then. So to try and act you're so concerned about unborn babies in the womb now, when you're really concerned about unborn white babies because of the changing demographics, threaten to put white Americans in a minority in a few decades. That's the real concern. People who are screaming anti-abortion now really couldn't give a hoot. I believe if abortion was just limited to black babies, nobody would give a hoot. It wouldn't be on the conservative white Christians' agenda. None of them stood up at the time and condemned Margaret Sanger's organization that was starting to plan genocide against African Americans. At least that's what I'm told. And from R.G. Lee to Dr. George W. Truett to Dr. W.A. Criswell, Billy Sunday, K. Frank Norris, Beecham Vic, all of your prominent conservative white evangelicals during that time, Bob Jones University, who up until the 90s did not, as a Christian institution, didn't allow African Americans to attend the school because of the color of their skin, and none of the other conservative white Christians condemned that. But conservative evangelicals have always been the biggest voting bloc of conservatives, of the Republican Party, of conservatives when they were Democrats, now as Republicans. And to try, there's no interest in ridding the party of this consistent vein of white supremacy in light of all of the white supremacy groups that are there. And we had 13 white supremacists who ran for political office in 2018. All of them ran on the Republican Party ticket, not as Democrats. And that's how you know which party is most conservative. That's mainly what happened. In the 60s, because of Johnson signing the civil rights legislation, he said he's giving away the South to Republicans. And a lot of your old Dixiecrat Klan members and white supremacists and racists who were part of the Democrat Party switched over and started voting Republicans. And Ronald Reagan exploited that in 1980 when he opened his political campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where those 3 civil rights workers were buried. And that wasn't an accident. You say, well, why is that a big deal? He knew what he was doing. His campaign manager was Lee Atwater, who had recently, and I played some time ago, the briefing that Lee Atwater gave to a group of Republican politicians where he told them how to use the N-word without using the N-word, and use other language that would lead people to think that way, such as welfare queen and other things. You can go out on the internet and listen to Lee Atwater's deal. But Reagan opened his 1980 campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where those 3 civil rights workers were murdered. They had a Klan rally then, and he didn't denounce them. And he went throughout the South talking about welfare queen. Every politician at that time, conservative Republican politician, found it necessary to make a campaign stop at Bob Jones University, even during the time that didn't allow any black people to attend that. Conservative white Christians and evangelical never spoke up about that. Just never said anything about it, and claimed to be setting the standard for all of this. Now, moving on, that's a little bit of the history. Moving on today and to our esteemed president here. in the Oval Office. Why do I say the Republican Party is corrupt? I'm not excluding Democrats. I know they've had their problems too, but in my opinion, Republicans take the issue of corruption as if they're on steroids compared to Democrats. I mean, the power grab, power hungry among Republicans who will do anything. If voting fraud was so bad, why did it take Republicans until we had the first African American president to come up with these voter ID laws? I need to get something. Why did they wait until we had our first African American president to come up with voter ID laws to try and stop voting fraud? The problem is, it hasn't been a problem. It was nothing but a pretext to suppress African Americans and other minorities from voting. And even Phyllis Schlafly and some others, when you take a look at the laws, they're mainly implemented in key battleground states that are designed to shave off enough Democrat voters, and African Americans have been the largest constituent, so as to win elections. And this extreme gerrymandering, which Democrats used to do, the Republicans have taken it and put it on steroids. Now, the way they have drawn the map, even the conservative Supreme Court and federal court, conservative judges at the district, circuit court, and Supreme Court level have even ruled that they were deliberately designed, especially the one in North Carolina, even the one here in Texas. You know, we've taken a look at that. It should be easy for people to vote. Republicans for years were resistant to giving felons who have served their time the right to vote. That shouldn't be taken away from anyone, especially after you have served your time and your sentence. You're still a citizen, impacted. You should still have a right to vote. The number of acceptable IDs should be expanded. Just because you may have left out an dotting an I, or you forgot to put a hyphen here and this, everything else is right on your license. And Republicans politicians want you to kick that back. And I worked the voting polls for this past year, 3 precincts, doing 3 elections, and saw some of those rules that they come in. When it should be a judgment call, you know that's the same individual, but they just forgot to dot their I on their voter registration card versus what's on the driver's license. Little cheap petty stuff like that, that's designed to shave off enough voters, and mainly in African American districts. But how is the Republican Party corrupt? Let's take a look at Wisconsin here. When Democrat was elected governor of Wisconsin, during the break in December, Scott Walker and his Republican legislature got together and changed and limited some of the rules that the incoming Democrat governor, incoming Democrat attorney general could have. The same rules and privileges that they enjoyed when Republicans ruled, they limited and changed some of those, saying we need to keep the status quo the way things were, because Wisconsin wanted it that way. Well, if they wanted it that way, we would have re-elected you and re-elected a Republican Attorney General. You can just Google that story and read. A federal judge recently just blocked that power grab effort and reversed it and said they couldn't do that. Republican legislatures tried to do the same thing in Michigan, where they have an incoming Democrat governor, Attorney General, tried to change the rules. They tried to do the same thing in North Carolina a few years ago when the Republican governor was defeated, and this Republican legislature tried to do the same thing to, after this previous election, limit the powers of the incoming Democratic administration, powers that they enjoyed. Michigan, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. But one of the most embarrassing and shocking areas of Republican corruption took place in North Dakota. Now, I don't know if many of you kept up with that story. We did have a Democrat Senator, Heidi Heitkamp. She was elected back in 2012, primarily with the vote of Native Americans. So what did the Republican legislature do in North Carolina? They got together and came up with this scheme as to how to disenfranchise your Native American voters. They say you've got to have a physical address on your driver's license and on your voter ID. Well, on reservations, you know what I mean, they just have post boxes. And they didn't have enough time to react to this. It disenfranchised enough to let a Republican beat her. Came up with this bogus, many of you know what I'm talking about, except those of you who are Republican. You probably didn't look at that, pay any attention to that, because it really shows the true nature of what Republicans and the Republican Party, made up of a lot of angry, racist white males and some females who were born in the 1940s and 50s, and I know some of you don't like that, but you take a look at the face of the Republican Party. It's not diverse, it's not representative of America. It is representative of that group of people who you can see on videos who were spitting on, hitting, kicking, and throwing rocks and bottles and assaulting black students integrating high schools in the 50s and 60s. Those are the people who primarily make up the Republican Party today. And they're scared and threatened at changing demographics. But the Republican state legislature in North Carolina got together, came up with this rule, you got to have a physical address. It was okay for that in previous elections, it wasn't a problem. You know, so why would you have to do that now? It's just deliberate and blatant. They do it because they know their voting constituent will get by with it. And she lost, and it virtually disenfranchised, made that entire population basically couldn't vote. How is that any different from some of the old poll taxes and things that used to go on under the Jim Crow South by conservatives that were designed to disenfranchise African Americans? Now let's take a look at this president who we have in the Oval Office. I won't use the language that he really deserves, but another area that shows how corrupt the Republican Party is. You know, the only time Republicans start talking about debt and deficits when the Democrats in the Oval Office or control Congress. Republicans took over Congress in January 2011 until January of this year. During that time, according to the Congressional Budget Office, they added $7.9 trillion to the debt. 7.9, and they claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility. Never paid for anything. Even George Bush, you know, this prescription drug bill, he didn't pay for it. The war in Iraq, borrowed money from China and other places to pay for it. But now, if Democrats want to come up with some program where you got to offset it with tax cuts, no, they didn't pay for anything. The only time they talk about debt and deficit when the Democrats in the Oval Office. Look at these tax cuts. Mitch McConnell said it was supposed to bring more money into the federal coffers. They've just added to the debt. And another thing, Republicans controlled Congress for the last 2 years. Why couldn't this president get them to give him $5.7 billion? Why are you just not asking for it now that Democrats are taking control of Congress? You had Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan for 2 years. Don't you think they could have given you $5.7 billion for a wall if it was really about the wall? Why are you just not asking for it now that Democrats have taken over Congress? It's just a political stunt. It's nothing but a red herring to take away from the encroaching stuff that Mule is coming up with. Chances are it's going to prove. We've already seen that there was a document showing that he had an agreement with Putin to build a Trump Tower in Russia, then saying that he wasn't going to have anything to do with it. Said during the 2016 election campaign that he didn't have anything to do with Russia, and they came up with this document that showed he had an agreement there to build this Trump Tower, and Putin was going to be one of the, either the co-signers or something on it, said that his taxes were under audit and he would show them after the audit was up. Has anybody brought that up? You think you would let President Obama, Republicans and Fox News, that hate-mongering station, would let President Obama get by with doing anything like that? Not showing his taxes as much as you criticize him for not showing his birth certificate, and when he finally did, you didn't believe it. And the only way this president got elected was playing the race card over President Obama's citizenship and birth certificate, and he's even admitted off camera the only reason he did it is because it worked. If you want to know how Hitler was able to get in office, just look at the people who are supporting this man. None of us should be blindly loyal to any politician to where you have to sacrifice your integrity. Look at the number of Republicans with integrity who have abandoned him. From George Will, a staunch conservative columnist, to Bill Kristol, to a number of others. And you know Republicans hate him behind his back. They don't come out in public and say it because of the constituents who vote for him. They despise him. Look, after 32 years in the military, 25 on active duty, he's going to treat somebody like John McCain, a patriot. And I was in Iraq before too, knowing this genuine thug, as has been revealed by this investigation by the New York Times that showed the letter that he got this doctor to write in the 60s, saying he had a heel spur was a lie, and they showed it was a lie. Dick Cheney did the same thing. Rush Limbaugh did the same thing. Bill Clinton, Paul Wolfowitz did the same thing. Several others did the same thing back then. But they want to act, John Bolton did the same thing. Had 5 deferments, got out of serving in Vietnam. All of these people want to act as if they're so macho, so much in favor of national defense, except when it comes time for them to serve. But treat Senator McCain like that, what he just did recently here to the 4-star Marine general. Do you know what it takes to be a 4-star Marine general? The kind of character that takes and leadership skill. You treat him like that and he resigned in protest because of you pulling out in Syria. And Mike Pence stood up and said, well, we defeated Al-Qaeda a day after they just bombed a restaurant and killed 4 of our soldiers. Did any Republicans, conservative Christians, Robert Jeffers stand up and condemn him for this? Not only are Republicans corrupt when it comes to taxes, you know, they only get upset about it when Democrats in the Oval Office lying, saying they're going to add more money to the coffers, and it doesn't. You just gave a big tax cut to your wealthy people because you don't want to touch entitlement programs. And something has to be done with Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Republicans know that's mainly a death sentence. So they cut taxes up here for your super wealthy people and corporations. And this is a scam. When Democrats take over, they'll put up a roadblock to keep Democrats from raising those taxes, closing loopholes. And if you notice, this tax law didn't close loopholes on wealthy people and corporations who are still able to stash the profits overseas and then take the losses here. They didn't even dare close those loopholes like that. And Trump, somehow I misplaced that Trump necktie that said made in China. I was going to bring that in. I'm thinking he slipped somebody in my house there, a repairman or something, got that necktie and destroyed it. I haven't been able to find it since then. But one of his neckties says made in China. I was going to bring that in, but yet he wants to bring jobs back here to America, force other companies to do that. You know he's gone bankrupt 6 times, and during those 6 bankruptcies, dozens of people and dozens of contractors didn't get paid. Yet he acts as if he's so concerned about workers in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the Rust Belt, when he didn't pay the people that went unpaid when he went bankrupt, and he's the one that's shutting down the government. Mitch McConnell, if he just opened the vote up for these bills that Democrats have passed, you could get the government back open. Here's another thing. Has anybody made a recommendation to your congressman? If government workers can't get paid, you shouldn't get paid either. Has anybody reminded them that they're federal employees, government employees? You know the only time you can get 100% vote in both houses is when it comes time for a pay raise. They'll put aside the party differences and vote to give themselves a pay raise. You and I don't have a thing to say over it. Why not put that on the ballot during the midterm and presidential election if you want a pay raise? Let the people determine whether you want one, whether you deserve one. Don't just do it arbitrarily. That applies to all of them. But I mean, if he's so concerned about workers, you've got so many people, government workers, and Texas has the 2nd largest population of federal employees. It's either 2nd or 3rd in the country. There, many of them are hurt. You and I, we were working, regardless of what your income is. Can you imagine going 28 days? Well, it'll be 30 here, come Monday. 30 days without anything, and you have a family. And let's be some good Samaritans and citizens. We're blessed. Look around. If you have any employees, family, regardless, put aside the party label, difference, things like that. People are hurting, regardless. Natural disasters and some things are indiscriminate. It doesn't matter what party you're in. You got people around, maybe need some food, basic needs that are met. Be sensitive to them, reach out. But he's not concerned about those federal employees when he could have easily got $5.7 billion from Republicans who control both houses. None of these Republican constituents are asking him about that, taking a look at that things. He's making money as his hotel in D.C. He's so concerned about illegal immigrants, but he hires them for his resort in Florida and up in New Jersey. I don't see any Republicans screaming about that. This stuff. There was no caravan of ISIS and Al Qaeda coming across. Somebody said the only wall he can build to keep America safe are prison walls where he and his family members are incarcerated. Should be, you know, perhaps give him $5.7 billion for that, because chances are, when he's out of office, that's where he's headed. And he's just throwing this up as a red herring to take their eyes off of the encroaching Mueller investigation, stuff like that that shows collusion. Would you let President Obama get by with saying, I believe Putin over my CIA? Putin said he didn't have any interference in the election. Can you imagine if Democrats or President Obama did that, chose to believe? Bin Laden said, I had nothing to do with bombing 9/11, things like that, the building. And he chose to believe him over his intelligence sources that trace it back to it. But none of the Republicans up there will get upset about it. He chooses to believe Vladimir Putin, has had 4 private meetings with Vladimir Putin. Nobody knows what he talked about. Hiding that from his own administration. Yeah, and Republicans, voters just sit back, and politicians just sit back, say nothing about it. You claim to be, you make it seem Democrats are not concerned about national security. You don't even demand that he show you the notes of his conversation with Vladimir Putin 4 times meeting. And you claim to be patriotic, stuff like that. Not to mention the way he treated 4-star Marine general. If you think he's such a great president, whatever, believe me, there are plenty of openings in the White House. Why don't you go work for him? Apply for something. There are plenty of openings up there if you want a job or something. There are plenty of openings. First White House ever who's had to hold a job fair just to fill vacancies up there. But if President Obama said, I could walk down Broadway, shoot somebody, and not lose any support, I wouldn't have voted for him anyway, just out of dignity and self-respect. But he said that, still got elected. He was even amazed at that. You know, somebody that can insult you as a voter, your intelligence like that, and you still vote for him. You know, when we enable bad behavior, not to mention the tax cuts and the other corruption going on. Let's look at some specific things about how corrupt he is. Scott Pruitt, who was head of the EPA, who used to sue the EPA. Trump made him head of the EPA, and all of the corruption that was going on there, that he had to resign. Let's see. So, you know, in doing research for this corruption of the Republican Party, it's like target practicing and using the sky as a target practice. There's so much there, you really don't have to aim. You just point your weapon in the sky and shoot. There's so much out there, you could almost just wing it. But look at Betsy DeVos, who wanted to do away with public education. He made her as the education secretary. And let's see here. So many other
Attorney General, who was former Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, on that, thank you for the help out there. It's awful silent here, like a Baptist.
Let's not forget about them.
Yeah, and I mean, all of just the people that he's made apart. I don't know of anyone that got convicted under the Obama administration for corruption, but look at the people who've been convicted under his administration. There was Tom Price, Health and Human Services Secretary, spent $400,000 traveling. He didn't have a problem with Tom Price using military jets, traveling anywhere, but he wanted to play this tit for tat and prevent Nancy Pelosi from doing it in the theater. And he's only been there one time, and even after some people prodded him to do so. Scott Pruitt, the EPA. Mick Mulvaney, Director of Office and Budget Management, has confessed that while serving in Congress, he only met with lobbyists after they ponied up a donation in his campaign. Making money at his hotels, his golf resorts, all of this stuff. Not to mention his derogatory, vulgar language against women. It's one thing to vote for a politician, but to remain silent when you know they're wrong. Like conservative evangelicals are not. You know he's wrong, you voted for him, and you say nothing about it. Because what conservative evangelicals are after the Supreme Court, I can assure you they're praying now for Ruth Bader Ginsburg fall off so they can fill that vacancy with another right-wing conservative. That they're chomping at the bits. And Lindsey Graham acted as if he wasn't concerned about that and walked off when Chris Wallace asked him about it. But he knows Trump already has somebody in mind for that. And whether or not she can hang on for another 2 years or not is a big, is a big if. I hope she does that. But they don't say anything about this president's behavior to bring him into check. Now, I've gone on and on about his corruption. Think of this. Representative Duncan Hunter of California, the second congressman to endorse Donald Trump, was indicted on illegally using campaign funds for personal enrichment. And Representative Chris Collins, the first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump for president, was recently arrested for allegedly perpetuating an insider trading scheme. Just a number of people. The way he treated Secretary of State Tillerson, he terminated him while he was using the bathroom. And the only president that most of his administration just despise him. Look at what he's done to the State Department. I'm not so sure if I would, Democrats who are running for president in 2004, do they have any idea what they're going to inherit? And the cruel, corrupt way Republicans play politics, they'll hang all of this around the Democrats' throat. They'll forget about Trump administration. They'll hang all of this stuff around the Democrats' neck in a heartbeat and not blink twice about it. The need to rebuild the State Department, rebuild your CIA, intelligence agencies. How can anybody say that he's concerned about national security and he's taking his oath of office seriously like this with what he's doing? There's no excuse for the border. If you wanted to end illegal immigration, all you have to do is simply punish employers who hire them. Their book laws, if you really wanted to do it, which would be cruel, and you would see the big impact that it has on the economy. You wait till you go out to a restaurant, a hotel, some other services, some other jobs that hardworking people were doing. If I was in one of these countries like that running from MS-13, he's always mentioning MS-13. Why don't he say something about the Italian mob and mafia? Which one is worse? Who's done more damage to society? The 100-year years of the Italian mob and mafia? Italian Americans 100 years ago were given the nickname natural-born criminals because of the propensity for organized crime and violence. 5 organized crime families operating in New York City now. We know what happened in the city of Dallas, 50s and 60s. All of the mob hitmen who were taking out people. And Jim Gatewood, who spoke a few years ago in the back of his book, even lists the names, the photographs of all of those. Over 100 years. Why don't he say not treat them too nice? When his Trump Tower in New York was built and the casino in New Jersey, he built both of them using concrete from a firm owned by the Genovese crime family. I mean, there are plenty of violent, dangerous groups. Of course, MS-13 is bad, but bringing up that group is simply playing the race card and playing on the fears of people. What about many of your violent white supremacists? Sovereign citizens, 8 out of every 10 police officers killed in the line of duty or killed by an angry white male. Most of them members of violent white supremacy groups. I didn't make that up. You can look that up. So if he's concerned about police and some of the other groups around, there are plenty of violent gang organizations in America who've done far more damage than what's MS-13. Most of the people who are here illegally are those who overstayed their visas. Not those who coming across the border. And the best way when most of them come through is through plane, through aircraft, through the air. Not that. All of this, we should never park our minds and our brains to whether it's a Democrat or Republican. Can you imagine if Hillary came in, was doing all of this stuff, Fox News and everything like that, how much he hates women and stuff like that? I haven't heard anything about the 17 women who were suing him for sexual assault with credible accusations there. I don't think that's over with. And then his kids are making money up with that. But the Republicans, those who vote for him, are enabling him. They're not challenging him on anything. And You know, I haven't started to do my taxes this year, but we live in a state where we don't have state income tax. But it's interesting to see some of the deductions. People think that just because they got a little money in a paycheck, then the tax cuts work. They only work for super wealthy people who use those tax cuts to do stock buybacks and things like that, not pass on an inordinate amount, a serious amount to the people who were working for them, helping them make it. Let's see. I could go just basically on and on like this, as I've said, in looking up this, the corruption in the Republican Party, how they have basically sacrificed the high ground just for power, and how they virtually destroyed democracy by trying to limit the rights of everybody to vote, by making it easy for people to vote, come and vote the conscience, showing that they're really concerned about working class people. How about Senator Cruz saying during this last election that he was so concerned that he was in favor of this health care law protecting people against pre-existing conditions. He said he was in favor of that, and yet he done voted 69 times to kill the whole bill. And people still voted for him in spite of those lies. Knew he was lying. Knew he was lying, saying he was in favor of pre-existing condition. Still voted for it. And none of the, again, Mitch McConnell could easily solve this by putting all of the bills that Nancy Pelosi and Democrats have passed and proposed to open the government and fund those departments. You could easily do that. He's not interested in $5.7 billion. He could have easily gotten that from Republicans during the last 2 years. When they were in charge of both houses, they could have shoved it down Democrats' throat regardless of it. But most Republicans didn't want it either. And most of you Republican congressmen now don't see the need for that. Democrats are in favor of border security, but reasonable border security. All of the tunnels they found under the walls that they found there, as if that's going to build up, sure, a fence or something. And most of the border, I would say either the 90% of the border is secure now, with walls or some kind of obstacle that's there. And I've been told that if you're going to build a wall where he thinks it needs to be built, you're going to have to do eminent domain, take the land away from farmers. That violates one of the other Republican principles, you know, of property rights, things like that. You're going to have to take some of the land away from people there. Now, how can we solve this corruption? Again, I don't know what Democrat in his right mind want to take over this stuff in 2020. And you're going to have to rebuild state departments and rebuild international respect and loyalty, which none of the other countries respect them. Put Putin back in his place, shore up NATO. I'm not so sure about all of the tariff wars, the way he's going about it, and things like that. It's going to add, it's going to increase. The situation has gotten so far out of hand to try and do anything serious about it and start a tariff war now. It's going to hurt others, and I think farmers are being hurt by that now. He pulled out of the TPP, and those 11 countries over there now are trading among themselves. They're trading, since we pulled out of it, they're doing the trade among themselves, and it's just a matter of time before they realize they really don't need us, need our interest. They're getting all of what they need, and just a matter of time before the dollar loses its status as the world's #1 currency. Do trade and things like that. The situation that he's just put the country in, it's going to take years to undo this. And just imagine if he's in office for another 2 years, and I doubt if Mike Pence would be any better than this. But how can we begin to solve some of these things? You and I will have to abandon basically party loyalty, and the fish is rotten from the head up here. If it's someone that's a part of our political party that's messing things up like that, we've got to, just for the safety and to save the country, you've got to cross the aisle and vote for somebody different outside of your party. Because what he's doing is basically affecting all of us, poor and working class people, things like that. We need to rein in lobbyists and special interests. lobbyists should be barred from fundraising on behalf of members of Congress. This would end the kind of pay-to-play behavior embraced by the likes of Mulvaney and prevent well-connected special interests and donors from playing the role of puppeteers in shaping the policy agenda of elected officials. We also need to get rid of this Citizens United, which allows so much money to pour into politicians. I like Tom's, I can't remember what it is right offhand. I like his explanation, his plan, that you give politicians just free airtime to do that, give each one of them a certain amount of free airtime, and you take away all of the money politicians where wealthy multinational corporations basically run the world. They buy off our politicians, like your Koch brothers and things like that. You know, more true of Republicans, I believe, than Democrats, but they buy off our politicians. You got Kristen Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, who's in New York. You know, Wall Street owns them. You got your Wall Street Democrats, things like that. But Republicans are the ones who want to do away with any financial laws that restrict them from using and playing casino with taxpayers and investors' money, and then coming back and letting, enforcing taxpayers to have to pay for it. Members of congressional committees should not be allowed to accept campaign contributions from the same industries they are entrusted with overseeing. Members of Congress should be prohibited from sitting on the boards of for-profit companies, whether in a paid or unpaid capacity, or from owning individual stocks in such entities. These are just some things that you and I can do, but the situation is so bad with the loose cannon in the Oval Office now, who's incompetent and corrupt, that you have a large number of Republicans who switch parties and who are just saying, and who have more integrity than many of the other diehard Republicans, including many of your white evangelicals who still support him and won't even criticize him, won't point out anything, just give him a carte blanche, never say anything about, never notice any of the red flags that have been raised about his connection with Vladimir Putin and Russia, refuse to criticize him, refuse to put pressure on him to give up the notes and the content of the meetings that he's had with Putin. On down the line, there is something there. And look at all of the people that's been convicted in his campaign. Everybody's waiting for the 7th of February for Michael Cohen that he threw under the bus to testify. You've got Paul Manafort, who've already been convicted. Several others have already been indicted and waiting a conviction on the way to jail. I mean, what more does it take? That's the end of my presentation.
Question time.
Yes.
Hold on.
Hold on, we're going to get the microphone working first.
Oh, it should be working. Did it get turned down or something?
Oh, yeah, we set it down.
I didn't turn it down.
I did.
You did,
Could you let me go to
okay.
the,
Testing,
could you let me
1,
go to
2.
the bathroom right quick?
Sure.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, test it.
And you don't have a lapel mic on, so you're safe.
Right, okay. All right, I
Okay, so we're on hold.
We're on hold
until
until
Curtis gets back.
Curtis gets back. Yes.
Test them out.
Yes.
Testing.
Yeah.
And I have a question. Or two.
Yes, what? I'll collect some loot while you.
He's telling me about it.
Just a second.
General school.
This company coming late.
Oh, I come in late every week.
They're really fooling around.
We're good.
Your whistling is right on tape.
How much more could you stand around and have a
I'd be baffled to tell what key you're whistling in. I don't know, I don't care.
You didn't take it.
Slow it down.
You may have to.
Just uninvestigated waste of time. A waste of time.
Just pick, Albert, just pick one issue. That's what I advise. It's really difficult. It is very difficult.
I think I'm going to pay my bill and go. Why talk to a brick?
Because the brick needs to know that there's another side. That's all.
Brick will never know.
I'll stop stealing.
Yeah.
60 days if you give me half of your land.
Probably after Ken makes the comment, he will.
The exchange of you know, I mean, it's
The 16.
I love the
$20 bill.
It's up to $4.
I've given you 20 minutes.
That Obama showed in his transcript. Okay,
You need to get up to date.
that's what he moved.
Yeah, it's what goes. It's inflation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I understand why, but I didn't know it was going up.
All right.
All right.
All right, bring it on.
I have 3 questions.
Okay, please talk into the microphone.
I have 3 questions. I don't know if I can ask 3 questions in a row.
All right.
Okay. Recently, there were 2 laws that were passed. One was the First Step Act, and the second one was the urban revitalization that created opportunity zones for. And my 3rd question is, you started off with abortion, and you said that was a way to harm the, certain groups. And I'm thinking, are women forced to have them, or is that something they can choose to do or not do?
Okay. Well,
And I was just wondering what you thought about the urban revitalization program and the First Step Act.
oh yes, yeah. Those programs work. A lot of what the president is doing, he's basically trying to keep some of his campaign promises. If that worked, not everything he's done is bad, but I would question, the motive behind. To me, all of that is basically a red herring, sometimes to get away from the real issues, serious issues surrounding his campaign, the denial that Russia played a part in 2016 election, all of that. A lot of those things are basically, in my opinion, red herring, and he's very good at that, deflecting from the real issue. Those programs, if that work, and if it does that, then just fine. Yes.
She had something about abortion.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, women are not forced to have those, but from the evangelical position, they've always, you listen to the evangelicals now, it's murder. I've got my convictions about it too, but no, women are not forced to have those. But evangelicals have always sort of been altruistic when it comes to the African American community, saying, well, more African Americans should be opposed to it because that's what Margaret Sanger in the 30s started, the organization targeting genocide. But none of them stood up and condemned it then. They want to act as if they're so altruistic now. They're concerned about black lives, and they're really not. God is concerned about life from the womb to the tomb, not just from inception to birth. And I just question the sincerity of their concern about abortion because of the contempt that they have in so many ways toward life outside of the womb. Just my opinion. Yes.
Black support for Republicans is generally maxed out at like 10% or less historically. An August Rasmussen poll puts black support for Trump at 36%. How do you explain that?
I don't believe that. I do not believe that. I don't believe that. I find that hard to believe. It may be higher. I know there are a lot of African Americans who support Trump. In my opinion, it's more of a publicity stunt, and it's more of an ego trip or something, because you can't believe, you can't just take all of his policies and things like that out of context. But as far as that being 36%, I don't see that. I just don't believe that. I'm serious. I would be shocked if it wasn't.
You can lie with statistics.
Curtis, you are aware that Nancy Pelosi says we don't need a wall, correct?
Yeah, she's.
Are you aware that she has an 8-foot wall around her property?
Oh, give me a break.
No, I'm not giving you a break because she's not the only one. She's not the only Democrat.
George Soros has a wall.
Yeah.
All these people have walls around their property.
Well, but I don't see. That's completely different. Trump
It's
probably
completely different.
Yeah, Trump probably has that around his too. I mean, Republicans have it. She's probably not the only Democrat has a wall around her property, but it's completely different from trying to secure the borders. She probably paid for the wall that's around her property.
She probably, well, actually, I think we did,
but you know, you just being facetious anyway. I mean,
not truly facetious. One other thing I wanted to question about is my understanding of the conservative objection to the current state on abortion is that my tax dollars go to what I would consider murder. That's a little bit different take. I mean, you've heard that idea before, haven't you?
Frankly, I agree with that too. I'm an independent. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent. In my opinion, personal opinion, I would agree with that. With Planned Parenthood, there are a lot of other services. That, in my opinion, should be stopped. But there are a lot of other services that they do for the health of women that I think hasn't been pointed out, that hasn't been emphasized. Yes.
Curtis, you mentioned you worked a poll somewhere, and you saw voters being turned away because of minor discrepancies in their driver's license and that sort of thing. Did you see that, or did you just hear about that happen?
I saw some of it. There was there were a few instances where maybe, like on what was in the system, in the voter registration that was in the system, what was on the ID card, it may have been something was missing in their middle name. To be honest with you, I didn't, but some of the other clerks did, because they had to. They had to fill out a form, send it in so that what's in the system matched what was on their driver's license or voter ID. And some of those, but there were some others did. I didn't say that, but I didn't turn anybody away from that just because of that little minor discrepancy. And you could see that everything else matched. That was the individual. Yeah, that was just, could get in trouble with that. But personally, I did. But there was some of the other clerks did.
I've been an election judge, and that's very different from what we're told. We're told if it's a close match, you go ahead and let them vote. You can come and vote with a water bill. It's got your name on it, whether you got any identification or not, which seems pretty slipshod to me. But you know, if that was happening, it's not what they were told. Were you working a Republican precinct?
Well, I was working at this last. I don't think it was a Republican precinct. It was just a precinct. When I worked in December, in November, it was just election precinct.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, did it go Republican or Democrat?
Was the election judge Republican or Democrat?
I don't know. I really don't know. Probably Republican. She was probably a Republican.
Didn't make any difference.
It would be only in a primary, would there be a difference?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, but
yeah.
they're,
This was Republican. This was all of them there. I think all of them there were Republicans. But there were some things that didn't match in the system versus what was on their ID card that I thought was minor that shouldn't have been, and some of them were turned away. Well, I'll tell you what, they weren't necessarily denied the right to vote. Let me correct that. They had to fill out something to send in to correct that, and they were allowed to vote. Let me get that straight. They had to fill out something. There was a form they had to fill out to go back, and then they turned that in. Then they were allowed to vote. But in some of those instances, I let them vote and just told them they need to go and get that corrected, especially when the lines were so long.
let me ask you one other question, then I'll turn this over. You mentioned that Christian conservative women weren't talking about abortion of African American babies way back when. Why they stand up? Do you know of anybody other than Christian conservatives who speak out against abortion, who have ever spoke out against abortion?
Do I know of anyone other than conservatives? Yes, I do. There are plenty of African American evangelical churches and others that speak out against this. As a matter of fact, Kay James, who was the director of what that agency, the name of the agency that hires civilians, CBO or CPO, she was a staunch, she was an African American, and others that spoke out against it. You've got plenty of black conservatives do. You got Candace Owens, you've got one of Dr. King's daughters, regularly appears on Mike Huckabee's show program. What I was saying about abortion, I just questioned the sincerity of some conservative Christians about it, because when Margaret Sanger started her organization in the 30s, targeting African Americans for genocide, and she was an avowed white racist, I haven't been able to find any of your prominent Southern Baptist pastors or others who took note of that and condemned it and said it was wrong. Black lives were just not considered that important then. That's really what that organization is trying to say. They're not saying that sure black lives should matter to other blacks as well, but when it comes to the criminal justice system, and by comparison, black lives should be considered just as important as white lives. And you know the South and the old system just hasn't been there. If they were really concerned about unborn babies, you wouldn't have waited. There would have been plenty of voices challenging that system then. And we've got to be concerned about life from the womb to the tomb, not just from inception to birth. You know, wherever it is being taken in any unjust sense.
There were plenty of voices expressing concern about abortion. They just didn't make a distinction about whether they were white or black.
Well, but that particular, if you're going to start an organization like that, specifically targeting a certain group for genocide because of that, then you've got to point that out. To me, that's important enough to point out.
Thanks for coming, Curtis. One bit of a suggestion to you. A suggestion is that I think you need to find a couple of things you like about Trump, something that he did, because when you hear just everything's bad about him, it's very easy to kind of just say, oh, here's another Trump hater.
Yeah.
So I would,
Here's one thing
I would
I like.
find one thing, and recently, didn't he do something with the laws so that kids get, you can't go to jail for 30 years for smoking pot, you know?
That was in the works long before he even became
Nonetheless, find something. Just find something so it's not so easy to turn you off and just another Trump hater.
Here's the one thing I like about it. He's a smooth, corrupt politician. He knows how to manipulate people and to win favor. He knows how to do that.
All right, and the other thing I would say is, like, I think Hillary Clinton ran on the platform that she wasn't Trump, and I think you guys are heading that same way again. You just talk bad about the guy. Everything's bad about the guy. I think you got to be careful not to do the same thing Hillary Clinton did and said, "I'm not Trump, vote for me." I think you'll end up losing again.
I understand. I'd be surprised. It wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if he got reelected. I doubt if he'll be around long enough too. But in light of his Kool-Aid drinkers, but I would throw the question back to you. Can't you find something wrong about him so that we won't think the same way of you? I mean, don't just turn a blind eye to him. Look at how quick he will go south and go to the gutter on women and stuff like that. What he will say about them. I mean, the very antithesis. The man's been married 3 times, and each wife he's had, he was having an affair with her while married to the previous one. And kids, I mean, but
you know,
I understand what you're saying.
Wait. If we're going to do that, then what I'll do back to you is I'll say, Obama destroyed Libya. Hillary Clinton took millions of dollars from the Soviet banks while she was selling our uranium. I come up with really big stuff that needs to be examined. And this guy, he's not a nice guy.
Listen here, Shepard Smith on Fox News has debunked that story as being myth. About her selling uranium to Russia. Listen to Shepard Smith.
I've debunked Shepard Smith.
She has debunked that story as being myth. That didn't happen.
Well, okay.
Yeah, you can just go to Fox News, listen to his rebuttal to that. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Curtis, you know that the white population in the United States is declining in reference to I'll just say non-white population to include everybody, okay?
Yes.
When the non-white population gets into the majority, can you promise us that you won't take revenge on us for the bad treatment that you received at our hands when we were in the majority?
I can only speak for myself. I'm not in control of anything else. Just like nobody can promise me that there won't be another Tim McVeigh, another Dylan Roof to go into shooting. I can't promise what somebody else is not going to do. I love everybody. I've just got some strong feelings about some things, but I can only speak for myself. I hope not.
Well, the reason I bring that up is it's my belief that there are white people who have been standing on the necks of black people and others their entire lives. They love their white privilege. They're terrified that when they lose it, that they're going to get the treatment that they dished out. And that's where all the spirit is coming from.
Yeah, I can almost, I'll go out on a limb and say the majority of black Americans are not thinking like that. We're far more forgiving. Look exactly how we were forgiving with Dylan Roof for what he did. Because we want to move on. Enough of that. There may be a few around who may want to do that, but the overwhelming majority, no, are not thinking, just want to be treated first-class citizenship, treated not just based upon color of skin, not walking in a store and being held under suspicion and distrust because of this. And if you don't think that still goes on, watch the 2020 documentary True Colors, did by Diane Sawyer and Hugh Downs. But I would say the majority of African Americans are not thinking about that. You just want to sit at the table with you, be treated dignity and respect, be able to apply for jobs that are not advertised based upon credentials and skills and knowledge. Just that, not just make that a rhetoric, not just make that rhetoric and hyperbolic rhetoric, but just make it true in reality.
Okay, who's got the mic?
I have it. First off, I'd like to address the abortion question that everyone raised here. Anti-abortion move goes across pretty much any fundamentalist faith source, whether it be Christian, Orthodox Judaism, Islam, whatever. It tends to go around the world. And it's all, which any of those faiths, as far as I'm concerned, are misogynistic to the core to begin with. And they've also, in this country, now elevated it to trying to deprive even women of birth control pills by not making it, insurance companies pay for them, certainly not, government funded clinics.
So your question is?
I'm getting there. Well, I'm joining in the conversation, if that's okay.
Well,
I'm going to, okay? We listen to you. Okay, so in any case, the question I had for you, Curtis.
Okay, my knees are killing me, so I just...
you were in the service for, did I hear you say how many years?
Yeah, I was 32 all total and 25 on active duty, yes.
So when you retired, you were Lieutenant Colonel?
Yes.
Yeah. And you served in Iraq and all that. When you were over there, the military has always, was my understanding, the military has always been strong Republican backing. So when you were in Iraq, what did you sense the change, if any, in their political thought, whether coming from white service or any other sectors of the military as well as black, which may indeed also address, you know, black support for Trump?
My observation is that most of the African Americans were still Democrats, and most of the white officers were strong Republicans. I've noticed a lot of your senior white officers can go from a military career to a defense contract job. There's a big good old boy system there, and your defense contractors, that's another big sacred cow among Republicans there, the whole defense contracting deal in war and how the Treasury is looted there. But it broke down along racial lines in terms of who support. Behind the scenes, if you get officers off record and talk, they didn't think that that was justifiable, didn't want to be there, because commanders bond with the soldiers and units. And you know, with all of the memorial services and things that's going on. And the frustrating thing was how long that went on, and it could have ended if Donald Rumsfeld had listened to somebody. It could have ended within just a few months, rather than lasting years.
But in the lower ranks, in the field, whether it be black or white, were the whites still separated as Republicans?
The listed people, they basically Democrats.
Yeah, even in the white sector, do you think?
Military, but it's officers that you
Yeah, the officers were mainly all Republicans, because the defense contracting and all of that is a good old boy, it's sort of a good old boy system where you can go some of these lucrative jobs with a defense contractor. It's there, Lockheed Martin and others. Many of those jobs were not open to black officers and stuff. It was kind of closed, good old boy network with that, with some of your defense contractors and agencies.
So much the Eisenhower's word.
Exactly.
Where the military homes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
No one paid them.
Yeah, no one, and it was, I mean, what, $6 to $7 trillion? And they awarded little or nothing to show for it. And then the people who planned that were Vietnam draft dodgers who had no concept of war. Colin Powell and his chief of staff, they served in Vietnam, and they warned them about it. If you've ever been to war, you know you just don't do that offhand. And planning for 30,000 wounded soldiers that you're going to have to take care of for 50, 60, 70 years, knowing you're going to have to overhaul the VA system and the civil service system so that you give feet to you wanting to take care of veterans so that their health care is the same as what you would get in the private sector. But people who dodged the draft, Vietnam, they didn't give a, they had no concept of that. A lot of that was being said. I heard that behind the scenes. If you were going to talk and have a conversation like that, you had to do it off record, stuff like that, because of all of the loyalty and things. Jesse.
You said that you haven't done your income taxes yet?
Well,
I just wanted to let you know that I have, and be prepared to cry.
Oh Lord.
Because I didn't get squat from the supposed tax break.
I got some back last year, and I got a big wad back last year. Probably my fault because I didn't adjust my withholding, stuff like that. But you know, retired income does not have the same investment opportunities as earned income, which if they really want to help the middle class, working class, then make that possible. Either treat the money that people make from investment income, tax it at the same rate as earned income, which is one of the issues that Mitt Romney does. Investment income of what, 14, 15%, and yet other tax rates 20, 28, 25%. But retirement income doesn't have the same tax advantages and investment opportunities as earned income. I don't quite understand that.
So, Curtis, I have a question. So, would you say it's corrupt people taking advantage of an honest system, or do you think it's a corrupt system that's being taken advantage of?
I'm not so sure we should make that distinguish, because it's corrupt people who create the corrupt system. I mean, well, not necessarily corrupt people, but people with self-interest. You know, they create policies and things that are designed to benefit them and their donors and their constituents. That's just, yes.
But when you have the election cycles, sort of perpetual election cycles that cost the earth, that obviously lends itself to massive corruption.
Yeah. Okay. I see your point.
I was just thinking one of the nice things you could think about Trump was that he's eliminating human trafficking. I don't know if you know much statistics about that. I read that it was the highest in the world under Obama.
You mentioned Bill Kristol.
Mm-hmm.
What is your definition of a neocon?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. He, Cheney, and many others are neocons. But
would you say that a neocon is in fact a warmonger?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. He and Cheney, they were. Was he favor all behind the Iraq War?
Bill Kristol, his father Irving Kristol was one of the founders of the neocons, and he's a Trotskyite socialist.
I am sitting here and listening to one of the most divisive presentations I think I've ever heard here. Now, I think this, and I want to see what you think about it. I think the way that people in this country and really in this world are divided up by left, right, this, that, and the other is controlled from a lot higher source than those people. They're just the puppets for control that allows others to benefit from the hardship of everyone else. And the greatest incentive for making a lot of money is war and reconstruction after war. And you cannot have war, no country can, without its banking system.
That's right.
And it's one international banking system that funded Hitler and England and the United States, etc., etc., etc. They don't give a tinker's damn about anybody but their own greed. And I think we need to look at the larger issues. You know, they're very symbolic, they're very ritualistic, they're very occult, they're very Satanistic in their practices, and more of that is coming out. Now, I think that we need to look at that dollar bill that we have, and look at that pyramid, and ask ourselves, why is the top part of that pyramid lifted up above the rest of it? Because everything under that top part are the stupid pawns that we all are to let ourselves get so divided that we don't see the bigger issues and who they really are. What do you think of that?
Thank you.
Yeah, I've talked to you one-on-one about that before. I still haven't gotten around to reading that Creature from Jekyll Island. I've got the book, and I started some of it, but it's a big book, and it's hard to see that behind it. I haven't read or heard of a presentation on it. It's kind of hard for the layperson to see all of that stuff from behind the scene. You know, who's manipulating and who's creating all of this. It seems as though they're able to, whoever's doing that is also perhaps able to be the puppet without anybody really know what's going on, the cause and effect. Because if you get your news and stuff from the average media, you don't.
No idea.
Yeah, most of you just don't.
They own the media.
Yeah.
Curtis, in the past I've described the problem that we all face in whatever party we're in as being big money. If I want to look for the perpetrator, I just call the perpetrator big money. You did mention the State Department. During Obama administration, there was a spokeslady for the State Department who disclosed on national television, I think it was CNN, that the State Department had spent $5 billion to destabilize Ukraine. How does that figure against your saying that we need to rebuild the State Department after Trump is done with it?
Well, the reason I said that, from what I've read, just the number of people who have left, the number of senior people who have left, who had some seniority, who seem to be playing a key role in you know, in our national security and keeping things stable. I would want that in the State Department. I want it in the CIA. Our president has engaged in some personal vendettas and snatching security clearances from people who criticized him. But from what I've read, there's just been a lot of massive number of people who had some seniority in the State Department that, well, the department was gutted. And Tillerson seemed to play a strong role in that. And there's some agencies I think we should be beefed up. Justice Department, FBI, other agencies that provide some vital security information and briefing to our president, and none of it. I've heard that he doesn't even read a lot of the reports on his desk that comes from his agencies. I want to give it.
Just real quick to validate something you said earlier, my brother was an F-16 pilot in the Air Force and retired a few years ago as a colonel. And he is a Democrat. And he told me that he and his wife practically had to have secret handshakes to identify the other Democrats because the officer corps was so heavily Republican. So I think that validates what you were saying.
Yeah, officer corps usually is.
Yeah. Now, what I wanted to ask you about is when I look at the abortion issue, what I want to know is if the government is going to say that I don't have to pay for someone else's abortion because it's murder, then why can't I say that I don't want to pay for our armed forces to go overseas and kill people? You see what I mean? I mean, I think I support pro-choice, but what I'm pointing out is the logical fallacy of claiming that an abortion is murder, but the armed forces killing people is not.
Theoretically, the baby's not your enemy. Theoretically, the baby's not your enemy. That's the obvious.
But you're answering for Curtis. Let Curtis answer.
Yeah, I would say the argument is one is innocent, one is completely innocent, and the other one is not based upon a country thinking that they're a national security threat. That's all I can say. Baby in the womb hasn't done a thing to anyone. It's just not unwanted, has no say-so and stuff like that. It's basically innocent versus someone who's perceived to be a national security threat. I'm not saying that's valid, but that's just the best response I can give to that.
Right. Now, the Republican Party has made a science of dividing, people by race, gender, sexual orientation, and and all kinds of other things in order to facilitate maintaining their power. My question is, you mentioned, and I agree with this, that what we need to do is we need to see the common interest. That is the economic interest of a blue-collar white guy and the economic interest of a blue-collar black person or gay person or whatever are in fact the same interests.
Yeah.
So my question is, what do we do in order to facilitate that?
I would say people, working class, poor and working class people just need to vote their own economic interests.
Okay, let me ask you another question which may help. Do you think that that's why Republicans are so intent on destroying unions?
That's a good point. I hadn't made that connection, but yes. Yeah, exactly. You know, this is just, you know, when you give a presentation, this is just my opinion and my observation as to what, and I kind of tied my presentation into what I've observed about this administration, things like that. And the one irritating thing, having spent this amount of time in the military, seeing somebody as a draft dodger, this irritates me above all that. A draft dodger to treat some of his senior military officials, served in Vietnam, served the nation loyally, with such contempt. Even Senator McCain didn't even want him at his funeral. I don't know if, you know, that to me, that's unprecedented. And say that, you know, you like people who weren't captured when you didn't even go. No, no.
Just to continue on what he was saying about the abortion and how, you know, people are supposed to see these unborn babies as being innocent. And, you know, how do you justify sending, you know, people across the sea, you know, to fight in wars? Well, there's also innocent people that die in wars. There's innocent children and, you know, civilians that don't want the war, but yet they're getting killed. You know, there's no justification for that. You know, it's like, I mean, they're just called, yeah, like you just said, it's collateral damage, and they're like, oh, well, you know, it just happens. Well, that's, yeah. You know, that to me, that's just as important.
Yeah,
I don't agree with all the reasons why people have abortions, but it's none of my business why a woman decides to have an abortion. It's her body, it's her uterus, and nobody has a right to stick their nose in her uterus.
Somebody did,
you know,
or she wouldn't be pregnant.
Okay, all right, all right.
Yeah, there's some there.
Yeah. I'm ready to sit on my knees and kill it, so I'm ready. Yeah, go ahead. One.
Yes, I had a question. Do you feel that, is it your thinking that the only attack on democracy is a political attack?
So, I'm sorry?
Is it your opinion that the only attack on democracy is a political attack? I mean, all we're talking about is the Trump administration.
Well,
is that the only?
No. I just linked it to Republicans and just this administration from what I was saying. I'm sure there are plenty of instances. There are instances in which Democrats.
Can you name some other attacks on democracy?
No, I won't. I'll let whoever comes up here want to talk about, want to do the opposite side of this. Democrat. I'm biased. I just limit it to Republicans. Somebody want to come up, give the opposite side of that, and show where Democrats have done that. And I said at the beginning, hang on a second, I said at the beginning, Democrats have done the same thing, but my focus was on Republicans. That I don't hide that, but
that doesn't address my question. I'm asking, are there other attacks on democracy other than political attacks?
I'm sure there are. Yes. Yes, but
I mean, that's your subject matter, attacks on democracy.
Republicans, well, how Republicans were destroying democracy, basically by limiting people, others, everybody, limiting the freedom, people who want to vote, making it more difficult for people to vote. And then whenever they're thrown out of office at the state level, whatever they want to change the rules, tighten up the rules that they have enjoyed. And I gave the examples in Wisconsin, Scott Walker.
So your sole presentation is on political.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go.
Curtis, you made much of President Trump talking about how he didn't believe the CIA. Back 15 years ago, the CIA was telling President Bush that Iraq was developing nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. Mm-hmm. And, you know, President Bush repeated that. And he got us into a war which was approved by Congress. It was voted. Hillary Clinton and John Kerry both voted to approve that war. They were for it before they were against it. President Bush didn't have that luxury, so people yelled, Bush lied, people died. But it all stemmed from what the CIA was telling the president. Now, should he have believed him?
Well, hindsight, I guess, hindsight, I guess, no. I don't know what kind of, I don't know exactly what the CIA showed him, you know, what the briefing was about. But in hindsight, no. But on this issue, the CIA and intelligence agencies have told them that Russia, Vladimir Putin, interfered in the 2016 election, and they presented him with the evidence to support that. I remember the acting Attorney General, what was his name, Rosenstein, came out and briefed and kind of went out. Now, he didn't go into any details that would reveal classified information, but they had, and they didn't reveal the tactics or the sources or anything like that. But I haven't seen anything or read anything that would contradict or refute that Russia did have something to do with the election, and they interfered with it in favor of Trump. That's what I've read, and that's the reports out there. I haven't seen anything different.
Curtis, how would you feel if Trump declassifies the FISA warrants and it turns out that this entire Russian collusion thing was cooked up by MI6 agent Christopher Steele, paid for by Hillary's campaign? How would you feel about that?
Just let the facts go where they were. Just let the facts, you know, just follow the facts. Man, I'm ready to. I'm ready to sit. My knees are killing, legs are killing.
So anyway, so someone else asked a question, but do you have any good words for Trump whatsoever?
Well, let me sit down and think. let me sit down and see if I can. He's keeping his campaign promises. He's doing what he said he was going to do. His campaign promises and things like that. And he's a good politician. He knows how to manipulate people and can say what a certain group of people want to hear. And if he can overhaul the criminal justice system, something that was started, a movement a long time ago, even under President Obama, to try to do away with some of the harsh sentences, extremely harsh sentences for nonviolent criminals, things like that. If he can do that, yes.
Did you realize that the first answer you gave to John's question was an indirect quote of Dwight Eisenhower? When Dwight Eisenhower was asked, can you tell us what Richard Nixon has done good for the country when Nixon was running for president? And Dwight Eisenhower said, give me a couple of weeks and maybe I can think of something.
Yeah. Well, okay, just you stay sitting down, I'll catch you there.
I seem to remember in the campaigning about the building the wall, that he was going to get Mexico to pay for it. Now, that didn't seem to go over too well. And then they got quite frankly, got a flat refusal on that, which would follow. So there's no motivation for Mexico to pay for this. But that was explicitly in his campaign. He was going to build a wall, and then it was going to be that Mexico was going to pay for it. So okay, given that didn't happen, why is it that the Republican Congress did not support their own candidate for a year and get this thing done? And now it's become literally a national crisis. So I'm just kind of curious what's going on there.
Yeah, I mentioned that in my presentation as to why this whole shutdown is bogus. It's a political issue. It's a red herring to get away, in my opinion, from the Mueller investigation, because it doesn't make sense. You've had Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan were in charge of the House and Senate for 2 years.
Why can't they pass?
Yeah, why couldn't it? It could have easily. If $5.7 billion was that important, why couldn't you get it from them then? But the fact is, most Republicans didn't think that was worth it. Voted it down.
Amazing.
And that's the reason. And you shut down the government now for 28 days?
Well, Trump has said that he's negotiated some kind of trade deal with Mexico. It's going to benefit us so much that it's like paying for the wall, what I've read.
That's
He's
totally
renegotiated trade. But anyway, if people aren't aware of this thing about abortion,
You're too loud.
Oh, okay. This thing about abortion, a full-term baby can be killed. I don't know if people are aware of that. And that Hillary said a full-term baby is not a human being. She has been quoted saying that. And that the baby can be actually killed. So that's really extremely objectionable, I would think.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. No. I don't agree with her on that.
She never said it.
As it relates to, again, the abortion, to follow up on you, this is a discussion that's been going on for decades and decades and decades, okay? Margaret Sanger was out there trying to get contraception for women and was put in jail accordingly. She believed in eugenics, and it not only related to black people, you know, but also anyone that was mentally defective by some hospital names. So, but the long and the short of it is, at the end of the day, it's, you know, while, you know, you might object to abortion, Curtis, you know, on a personal basis, and whoever doesn't want to have one doesn't have to have one, obviously, but from even any, you know, and the Christian right especially says no can do. They're going to have those babies no matter what their life is like, you know, precious life and all this good stuff. But they're the first to also, you know, say, oh, well, you've got this life now, but we're not going to fund your existence, okay? And they're the first to demonize all these minorities of, you know, that are having kids in their mind and shouldn't be having them. And then all of a sudden, you know, they lay themselves open to be whatever kind of language, coded language comes down the road out of a politician's mouth. One of Reagan's favorite term was the big buck buying T-bone steak on, you know, food stamps. So, I mean, it just is abominable and so hypocritical. So my question is, you don't seem to, while you believe or you have your personal beliefs in, you know, not being necessarily pro-choice, but then the flip side of it is, you know, these babies are born, no matter what community they're born in. Well, if they happen to be in poverty-stricken communities, which obviously there are many populations, and many whites, poor whites, are the biggest takers on welfare and food stamps, and it's not takers. That's what they have to resort to.
Well, let me clarify. When I got back on the abortion issue, I was pointing out one of the glaring inconsistencies of conservative evangelicals who've always supported the Republican Party, who used to support Democrats, and who want to chastise African Americans now for supporting Democrats because they are pro-abortion. Yet Margaret Sanger, who supposedly started this organization targeting genocide against African Americans through abortion, none of them, if they thought that that was killing unborn babies or killing a human being, none of them spoke out against it. At least I couldn't find any of the prominent evangelicals around who thought enough of the lives of African Americans, whether in or outside of the womb, to condemn that organization. Because she was an avowed racist, and that's why she was starting it. But it wasn't enough for them to take a stand against it, because it was the norm then to have that kind of racist attitude toward African Americans. That's all I was saying. I didn't mean to open up a can of worms, or what you thought about it was killing. I was simply pointing that out, that they've always been the strongest supporters of the party that was the most oppressive and had the most blatantly racist policies toward African Americans. That political party had its strongest support from conservative white Christians, evangelicals. All down, history bears that out.
Okay. Are you aware that the Democratic program of sex education, prenatal, postnatal care, contraception and so on actually reduces the number of unwanted pregnancies and therefore the number of abortions to a much greater extent than the Republican position, which is you're going to burn in hell if you have sex unless you intend to have a baby. So,
yes.
Okay. So would you agree then, if that's the case, that what the Republicans are really about is controlling women? It has nothing to do with being pro-life, it's about controlling women.
Yeah, I agree it has nothing to do with being concerned about life. That's just a red herring. Yeah, they're really not. If they were really concerned about life, they wouldn't just limit their concern to what goes on in the womb. They'd be concerned about the quality of life outside of the womb as well, as I mentioned, from the womb to the tomb. Not just that. But.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up question time. Okay, so the first person would like to rebut or add.
I'm going to rebut him because he missed mine last week.
Well, bring it.
Come up with a pattern of doing that.
Well, bring it up. Bring it up. That's one of the risks when you stand up.
The management.
When you stand up to speak, then you know you got a target on you from pros and cons. So bring it on.
Well, I just want to remind you when President Trump was elected, and I made some kind of report when I would rebuttal something. I said, well, I hope that his policies will help the United States. And you said at that time, you scolded me about that and said because you didn't think it would. But I think your report was somewhat similar to mine last week. You had a lot of reports that I held. But I wanted to just thank you for making this report. And we got to understand in America we have a class system. In the class system, what's important? We use other peripheral issues to polarize and divide people. And we find out like abortion is a good one. The Catholic Church is opposed to it. And I think, someone said, pro-choice. I'm pro-choice. I think everybody ought to have a right to make their own decision about that, not the government. Because we got bigger issues to deal with, and that's what we should be doing. As I indicated last week, and mine was from research, that since whites are losing or declining in numbers and ratios, right now in Texas, Latinos and African Americans are really the majority. If you add the Asians, we'd be about 3 or 4% larger. And in California, Latinos and whites have the same ratio. The issue is power. And what they're doing is they're trying to do away with family planning, so working class whites will have more children and they can retain the power. And that's a fact. I worked a lot of my work was wood planning, family planning, and wood planning. Started back in 1972. And in that time, we had Medicaid, but Medicaid was very limited in Texas. And what they were doing more than just passing out pills, they were actually doing medical examinations of the parts of women that they have a lot of cancer and a lot of problems. So that was probably the only health care that a large number of people got. And they were not only working with women that didn't want to have children, but they were working with people who couldn't have and trying to help them have children. They were doing both things. And I think that what our politicians in Texas are doing is wrong. Because if you have a little wisdom, most people are, you're middle class, you want 2 children. For the most part, that's the family that we want, a girl and a boy. And because we know that if we don't send our college children to college or a trade school, they're going to be very marginal in life. And we want to make them competitive. And so that doesn't matter. That's free of any demographic connotation. That's what most people want. Now, and because if you send a college child to school right now in a state university, for 4 years, almost cost you $200,000. So how many people can afford that? And so that's how I look at big bills. A lot of the health care that families got in the 70s and 80s was because of what the Planned Parenthood was doing. And we really made a state, you know, kind of a state-funded Planned Parenthood. Now they're fighting about it because they do abortion, but they don't use federal money to do abortion. It's a separate thing, a separate clinic. So my take is it's a class system. We don't want people to know about some of the things you talked about. And the average person that have the attitudes they have is the media. Anything you believe, you can find someone to support you that calls himself as an authority. So when people quote people, I don't pay much attention to it. I think one thing of education, it gives you, if you think a little bit, to look behind things, iterations that people make. And that's what we need to do. If more people would just think a little bit about what's going on, I think it'd be different. I played with this in classes at Cedar Valley. When I first went there, we had a majority of even them of African Americans and whites. And I would ask them, white students, why do you vote for candidates whose policy will hurt you? And their response was, and I put it on the test, I want the same privileges that rich people have when I get rich. so that's, and I asked them, why did they leave Dallas and move to the suburbs? They said they want to get away from poor people and dumb people. And I asked African Americans the same question, and they said the same thing. So I've always argued here that middle class African Americans and white culture is the same. There's no difference. And so if we could start there, all of us, we'd find common ground, and we could deal with these issues that come up that we're not doing anything about. I know money is the cause of all of it. And I really think we ought to have a law to prevent people from lying. And you know, I think if the president says something, it ought to be the truth. And so there are a lot of things, but I don't know, we have to wake up as a population to deal with it. I had another thing, the military, I wasn't fortunate. Well, I had the same opportunity he had. I didn't like the war. I didn't go to advanced ROTC, and as soon as I didn't go in after the sophomore year, before I could get home, I had a letter from the draft board, you better get an academic deferment or we're going to call you in the Army. And that's the year that guys and I sent troops to Lebanon. So we didn't want to go there. But anyway, I made a decision not to go in, and I was drafted shortly thereafter. I went into service. And I think everybody who's physically able to article of service should be no volunteer thing. Do that or go to the Peace Corps. I think they need that. And we all are, no exclusion at all. Like it was doing when I went in service. If you were rich, you could get out of it. You could get in the National Guards. African Americans could not. And that's what President George W. Bush got in the National Guard. He didn't. They had a policy, if you don't make your drills, you go directly to Vietnam. He didn't do that. He still didn't go. So it's a class system. They do what they want to, and we pay for it. So those are things we need. We have a lot of self-interest ourselves, and so we kind of relate to things like that. Many people don't like to read. They don't like to think for themselves. They just like entertainment and work. And they don't have time to think. And so that's why they believe what they hear without looking behind it. The State Department, they have well-trained people. Senator from Arkansas wrote a book, The Arrogance of Power. It was directed at, I know I'm old, it was directed at the State Department. You have to be exceptionally smart to work with the State Department. You have a very difficult test. And then a lot of people just sit in corners. But once they develop that skills, that's what I think you're talking about. We are losing people that we need, that have the experience, know what's going on, and we are dealing with a world that's that don't like America. And we better keep our guards up. If we don't, we are in serious trouble. Thank you.
Pretty agile, get up here. Curtis, I've gone over a couple of things. One is about abortion, and the only people I can remember ever speaking out about it have been conservative religious groups. The liberal groups don't seem to think there's anything wrong with it. It's not for this debate. I mentioned that when Trump doubts the CIA, that he has reason to doubt it. George Bush had reason to doubt it, but he didn't we're into that war. You talk about how awful Republicans are. I'll remind you some things. Our previous president promised that he won a Nobel Peace Prize because he was going to end the wars in Vietnam, in Afghanistan and Iraq right away. 8 years later, he hadn't done anything about that. In addition to that, he precipitated the overthrow of Libya and started the civil war in Syria. That was all done with the connivance of his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. You know, they're not peaceniks. Now President Trump talks about we're going to end this war in Syria, and he gets a lot of flack for it. But how do you think wars end? The military is never going to tell you that the war is over. They like it too much. The people that supply the military like it too much. They're going to tell you, oh my God, we can't leave now. But at some point you have to say, well, we're going to leave, and that's what he's done. We talk about all the distractions. These things about race and what have you are distractions in the sense that they are not the major problems that face America. For one thing, America is broke. You know, we owe over $20 trillion in government debt, and it's going up by $1 trillion every year. Somewhere in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to reach that point where nobody will loan us money anymore, and we'll begin to print it. That's right. And what happens when you begin to print it is that in a little while it becomes worthless. You can look at Zimbabwe. They started that. I have a $50 trillion bill. It was printed by the Republic of Zimbabwe. That was before they just gave up and decided there was no point in it. I got a 100,000 Bolivar note that when Hugo Chavez took power, it was worth $30,000. A couple of years ago, it was worth 30 cents. They've got a 1,000,000% inflation rate, so I imagine it's not worth quite what the paper is anymore. You know, that's the devastating thing that happens if we don't get control of our debt. You say, well, Trump hasn't done anything about that, but he told every one of his cabinet members, I want you to cut spending in your department by 5% next year. And he's a pretty determined man. Ordinarily, he will get to that. We're being led by a trade deficit. We lose $500 billion every year. It floats overseas and sucks out of our economy because of trade deficit. It's mostly from China and Germany. Like $470 billion of that $500 billion is those two. And he's told them, you're going to have to change your ways or we're going to put a tariff on you. We're going to start equalizing that. You know, it's not a trade war, it's about balanced trade. If you want to say putting a tariff on, we're already at war. You know, they tax our stuff and we don't tax theirs. And it's, you know, fair is fair.
Amen.
And, you know, all the things he's doing are good things. He wants to put America first. He wants America to take care of American interests. And the Democratic Party is fighting it tooth and nail. Not because they don't want to do it, but because, by God, we've got to fight Trump tooth and nail. This shutdown is that way. You know, before, in the previous session of Congress, there was an appropriations bill that had a wall in it that would have avoided the shutdown. The Democrats threatened to filibuster in the Senate, so it never came to a vote in the Senate. You know, if the Democrats wanted to avoid a shutdown, they could have just sat down and shut up, and it would have passed, and the president would have signed it, so we wouldn't have a shutdown. Congress offered Trump an opportunity to sign a continuing budget resolution. He said he wouldn't do that. That's on him. You know, we could have gone on and just kicked the can down the road like we've been kicking it for all these years. The Democrats could have offered him a bill that had the wall in it or some compromise, and they won't do that. So, you know, whose fault is it? It's going to come down to eventually somebody's going to have to give, or Trump's going to declare a national emergency. And I don't think it's going to be a national emergency to get money for a wall. It's going to be a national emergency to pay people that are absolutely essential and can't afford to work for nothing anymore. And I wouldn't be surprised if that won't stand up in courts, because it's that or disaster. But you know, I hear all this about Republicans do this and Republicans do that, but I don't see much cooperation on the Democrat side. I don't see much constructive thoughts on the Democrat side other than we're going to get rid of Trump. You know, this This impeachment deal, that's prosecution in search of a crime. They don't know what the crime is, but by God, they're going to find one somehow.
Yeah,
You know, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to find out about a crime and prosecute. When we talk about Russian interference in the election, the best they've come up with is that some Russian organization spent $100,000 on Facebook ads in a campaign that cost billions. You know, how big a deal is that? You know, Trump has put more sanctions on Russia than Obama ever thought about. You know, if they worked in his favor, he really sucked them in, because they haven't got anything for their money. You know, there's the deal about Clinton took $5 million for her Clinton Foundation, and all of a sudden approved selling 20% of our uranium supplies to a Russian company. Bill goes over and he gets $500,000 for a speech that he made over there. Now I'll tell you something, nobody pays $500,000 for a speech. They pay it for influence, and they got it. Well, I'll leave you with that.
Amen.
Blinding.
Why don't we turn it off now? We don't really need it.
Where is the switch?
There we go. Great.
Thank you.
All right.
That's the best thing you've done all evening.
That's what that. All right then.
Again, I think that the biggest thing going on in the world, not just this country, is efforts to divide and conquer.
Amen.
All of these little, I think most of these, for instance, crazy shootings at schools and things like that, if the people were taken and put under some therapy, they would probably be found to be mind-controlled robots.
Yep.
The CIA learned a lot of that when they brought Mengele over here after World War II, because he was into that. And they have set up institutes around the country to do that. So much stuff is pre-planned like that, and yet we just take it to get a bloody nose and react to it, so we get shuffled over here or shuffled over there. I am very much one who believes in thou shalt not kill. And I was very opposed to the Vietnam War. I felt from the beginning we were wearing the black hats, and it is proven that we did wear the black hats. The Gulf of Tonkin thing never happened. Politicians have admitted it was totally phony. So we went over there and killed, what, a couple of million people? And I knew one guy who was in Army intelligence, or his friend was in Army intelligence, it's hearsay. But he saw enough top secret paperwork, he had a high clearance, come across his desk that he knew there was going to be a war in Southeast Asia. And he knew that it was planned that, not estimated that, at least 50,000 Americans would be killed. They do this on purpose. When it comes to Gaddafi, anything and everything we've had in our news media about him, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm totally convinced of this, is 180 degrees the opposite of the truth. Gaddafi had his country on a gold-backed dinar currency, and he was trying to get the whole African Union on that currency. That gave that country prosperity that you cannot have with fiat money banking systems like we have. You know, Thomas Jefferson made the statement, if we ever let a private bank, i.e. the Federal Reserve, get control of our currency, that through inflation and deflation and the corporate structure that will grow up around that bank, amen, they will steal all the property from our descendants and leave them homeless on the land that we have founded. He knew that. He knew what the banking system was. The Russian Tsar ran the banking system out of Russia in the 1800s. Many of those people moved to New York City, and for a while it was known as Little Moscow. It was there that those people dreamed up and planned and went over to Russia and carried out the Russian Revolution that ended up with Stalin, their puppet, 60 million Russians killed. I mean, these people are so ruthless, it's incredible. And of course they killed the Tsar and his family and took all his money out of the banking system. let's talk about thou shalt not kill. I had a friend one time whose wife was pregnant. Her belly was very large. She was close to having birth. And she said one day to her husband, "Come over here, honey, and put your hand on my tummy here." And she did. He did. And the child pushed against his hand. She said, "Move your hand to another place." He moved his hand, and that little lump that the child was pushing on moved down, and it pushed against his hand over there. I met a couple down at the Gasparilla Parade in Tampa years ago. They were standing there watching the parade go by, and I remarked to the wife, I said, "You know, it seems that your husband and your son have an extremely close relationship." I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, we had a home birth, and I was having a problem. It was in breech position, and my husband had to reach inside of me to try to orient the baby to come out. And while he was doing that, that boy grabbed his finger with his hand and held real tightly for a little while, then let go and pulled his own shoulder down and came out. And they've been very close to each other ever since." Children are always living human beings.
Amen.
Period. All of these abortions that we have are the murder of a human being. The only compromise I can see is where having that child threatens the life of the mother, or if it's a rape victim. But still, there was one lady that I saw on YouTube, saw the interview. She had she'd been very unhappy in her life and very depressed, and she was pregnant and not married and went ahead and had this child. As it turned out, that child loved her so much that that child actually turned her life around, and she became a very happy person because of that child in her life. So to think that it's easy to plan it all out, it just may not be the best plan. Now, I'm very much not an atheist. I remember that another guy came here and he had a black t-shirt on that said, "I think, therefore I'm an atheist." And I was tempted to get a black t-shirt that said, "I listen, therefore I'm a theist." Because thinking is a useful tool, but it's only one of our tools. We don't think the subconscious mind, and yet we do train it. When you first learn to ride a bicycle, you've got to train it to take over so that you ride it without thinking about it. Many things like that. But thinking is a necessary tool to get up in the morning, turn the alarm clock off, and get dressed and go to work and drive the car and all of that. But I am totally convinced that thinking more often than not is in the way. David Bohm was interviewed in a book that I read. He was a physicist in England, and he was talking to the interviewer about a thing he called sudden insight. I've mentioned this before. And he said, sudden insight can only happen when you completely silence thinking in your consciousness. Even thinking about not thinking will interfere with the process. And if you can get totally silent, then sudden insight can happen. And here's this physicist. He says that totally explains instantaneous healing through prayer. Now, I know that healing through prayer happens. I would not be alive today on 2 instances because of that, and probably 2 more. But on 2, it's definite. And 2 other guys with me once wouldn't be alive either. It is important for us, I think, to get closer to nature. These big cities, these overpopulated areas we live in, deprive us of contact with nature, and there's a lot to be learned about life and appreciation of life through appreciation of nature. I was lucky enough to grow up in a small town where the paving ended at our road, at our house 2 miles from the courthouse, and it was woods out there, and I'd saddle up my little quarter horse and call my beagle, and we'd go out there and I'd lie under a tree and watch all the squirrels and birds, and just got in awe of what nature had created. And that, of course, John is not giving me any time to say it. I can't tell you all of that, but being close to nature like that was one of those instances in which 3 lives were saved, because I was able to hear something I would not have heard if I'd been thinking, left brain thinking.
That was the most decisive rebuttal The most divisive rebuttal I've seen.
All right.
Close it up.
Well, actually, the phrase, we're going to make America great again. Well, that has a couple of suppositions. Once, when was America great? How was it great? Why was it great? Could it ever get back there? I'm waiting to see a plan, actually, from somebody in the administration that's going to affect this situation and make it great. I haven't seen it yet. I doubt that anybody has a coherent plan. The neoliberals that have been in control for the last 40-odd years, their plan basically is laissez-faire. Free market, free trade. And of course that means we do nothing, okay? Because that's what the philosophy of neoliberalism is. The free market will take care of it. Well, the free market is eating America's lunch, dinner, and breakfast, actually. And so, okay, Trump has railed against it. But it's always against foreigners, It's the Germans who are taking advantage of America. It's the Chinese. It's the Mexicans. It's the Hondurans. It's people who are coming over here, grabbing our stuff. The real problem is looking in the mirror and discovering, what has gone wrong. Well, what's gone wrong is a simple analogy. As I said before many times, I used to row in an 8. And in an 8, you win races when the whole 8 people are synchronized closely, and you have a cox that guides the damn 8, okay? Well, I see half the country divided up. I see this private bank, actually, the Federal Reserve, that controls the level of employment in this country. That's their function, right? And so you have, at least 12 million to 15 million people permanently unemployed. You have poverty. You have the situation that certainly before the war and right after the war, a man could support an entire family. But the greed of the people that directed the corporation stuff, that once women went to work, you could reduce the wages of both. And even that is not enough. So you find, I see this all the time in my dealings in real estate. So you now have people working 2 jobs, both, and they're still not making it. We have a dire social economic problem. I see no effort to recognize that and rectify it. Half the problems you see in this country are caused by this, what I call a socio-economic disaster. And what I would say, as I said before, greed ruins everything. I'm afraid both parties really have been complicit in this. I see no party that really gives a damn about the average American, actually, or gives a damn about the country. And I see Trump with no coherent plan, really, to do anything that I would regard as effective. I've yet to hear it. I'd like to hear it, I'd like to see it. He's cursed everybody, he's insulted everybody. Friends of America are upset, okay? And you can't run a policy as a country without having friends. And he's done his level best. For example, what about NATO? He's against that. I mean, he seems to really play into the playbook of Putin, I must say. And I think Putin is a very, very dangerous person, actually. And so America best look to its proven allies who stood with it in the past, okay? And I think it has to get some form of a decent plan. I was in engineering. We didn't suddenly say, oh, well, we're just going to rely on the free market. No, we had a plan. And everybody who worked for me knew what they were doing, and they executed. And so this country, better damn well get a plan soon. Otherwise, because, we have a twin, trade deficit, federal deficit that's getting bigger, out of control. And this tax giveaway to people that don't deserve it is typical of this right-wing game plan we've seen. And of course, one of the problems is you have this built-in huge unemployment, this reserve army of unemployed people, which is mandated by the system, and you want to cut their benefits. So what are you really doing? You're causing more problems and hardship. And of course, they tend to be evangelicals who do this. Okay? They pretend to have some religious agenda, which I've said that there's a huge difference between religion and Christianity. Huge difference. And I would say the evangelicals are not Christian at all. They have a religious agenda, it's got nothing to do with Christianity. Otherwise, they would have a plan. In England, there was an unemployment rate of roughly 1%. It's never been achieved in America because they never wanted to. So, this is the problem in America. There is a class system, and I'm afraid the working class have been dealt a very bad deal. And we need the whole country to be well educated, well trained, okay, and that way the country can survive. And I'd like to see a plan that does that. Until you start obeying the Christian message, which is we help one another and love one another, and we cherish everybody, which certainly doesn't exist in what I see in this ruling elite, who are so greedy beyond avarice, it's amazing to me. And so until that happens, there is no plan. And I think the country really has a dim future, really. Because yes, there is a crash coming. And this huge rise in the stock market was caused by corporate buyback of their stock. Nothing more. There was no great productivity increase. It has not trickled down to the ordinary person. You see it. Whatever gain there has been is to the top shareholders and the top corporate people. But until you get a better distribution, and you make sure that everyone counts, and that everybody should be helped. And the main job of a government is to help and support its people to achieve something in life. And when you don't give a damn about people, which is what we see, you won't win races. It's like a boat with only 6 people rowing out of the 8. You just won't make it.
John, with reference to what you were talking about, history shows us that the more tightly you concentrate the wealth at the top, creating more and more inequality and more poverty at the bottom, what that does is it destabilizes the country, and ultimately the economy will collapse of its own weight. It'll just tip over. And so that is what we're facing. Now, what I wanted to talk about actually was immigration. Because you see, there's a very simple solution to immigration. The first thing we have to recognize is that by creating jobs and allowing employers to employ people who come here undocumented, while at the same time we do not let enough people into the country legally to fill those jobs, is what has created this situation. And so we have responsibility for having created it. And so the only way that we're going to fix it is as follows. First of all, we have to make it easier for larger numbers of people to come into the United States, both as guest workers and for the purpose of becoming citizens. Once we can meet the need of our employees through labor, through immigration, then what we need to do is we need to have a transition period where the people who are here undocumented have the ability to come out of the shadows, become legal in whatever form we have decided through the guest worker program and the path to citizenship program. And once we have done that, then the next thing we need to do is we need to come down like a ton of bricks on the people who hire undocumented workers so that there is no motivation to come here to illegally to be exploited by an employer. And once we do that, we will have solved the problem, because we need workers coming into this country, either as guest workers or as immigrants with the intent of becoming citizens, or as some friends I have, just simply green card holders so they're permanent residents with no intention of becoming a citizen. And the only way we're going to get there is by making it much, much easier for people to come here legally in larger numbers to meet the demand. And once we've done that, then we can move to the next step, which is to get the people that are undocumented out of the shadows, and then we can have severe sanctions on people who employ those who are undocumented, because there's no reason to employ someone who's undocumented if we're allowing sufficient numbers to come in legally as guest workers or with the potential of becoming citizens. And that's the only way it's going to be solved. And in order for us to do that, we have to recognize that we created this situation by allowing employers to employ people who were here undocumented, while at the same time not allowing those people to come in legally to fill the jobs in the first place. And I want to challenge you. I just want to ask you a simple question. If you live in Mexico and you have a family and you're starving and you can't get a job, and you can sneak across the border into the United States and get a job to support your family, are you going to do it? Of course you are. You see, so we are blaming immigrants for a situation that we created ourselves through our own errant policy, which I believe is based on greed, because when employers can employ people who are undocumented, those employees are terrified, and they can exploit them in a way that they could not exploit them if they were here legally. Thank you.
5 minutes, John, then we wrap it up.
Well, there may be a lot of Italian murders, but I've been in proximity to 3 MS-13 murders personally, and they take out police, they take out judges here, even in Dallas. This is a very active criminal group, and they are a real present danger threat. And the Italians may be as well, but at least they're much more quiet about what they do. It's like, you know, we have the Clinton body count numbers, and I got a chance to talk one time to Colonel Al Martin, and he was serving in the GHW Bush administration, and I think the Clinton numbers were running somewhere over 100, and he said the Bush administration was running over 300 he personally knew about, and they were just much more circumspect about the way they took people out. So what you have is we've been living under a coup since JFK. LBJ was brought up as a good guy. Truth of the matter is, people have researched and found out that JFK wanted the changes that LBJ implemented. LBJ was telling JFK as his vice president, the country's not ready for this yet. The country's not ready for this yet. So LBJ had that all lined up. Once JFK was out of the way, then he could be the great, he could, you know, have the great society and so forth, which was all JFK's plan. So much of our history and most everything we hear on the news is not exactly quite how it is the truth of the matter. One of the solutions to overpopulation, eugenics step aside, is family income. Because when you have a middle-class family, everybody only wants 2 kids. That's not even really quite replacement. It doesn't really work out that way when you work in, you know, the fact people die on the way to becoming adults and things like that. So it's kind of a really insane situation. If we want the population in Africa to drop, give them a middle-class income, get their economies going. Bring things around. I mean, it's totally reasonable. I mean, we have the evidence. Middle-class income, that's going to drop the birth rate. So that's another point. One of the problems we have is, in many matters, I think we can all come together, but there are 2 streams of divergent media out there. There is the never Trump all the time, negative Trump 24/7 media, and that's most of the media. Even Fox News sometimes goes anti-Trump. So here's one of the things. I don't know any conservatives who give Trump a clean bill of health, that, you know, talk about him as being Superman. But the man did have one of his campaign promises. He talked about building the wall. Is he not just trying to fulfill his campaign promises so later on he can say, well, I said I was going to do this and I did this? And we have a group who are working constantly to interfere with everything he's doing, and don't presume it's just the Democrats. Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, various people around in the Republican establishment have also put in roadblocks. In a sort of side issue here, I understand that we have a very clear and present danger of the power grid, to an EMP strike or a CME strike. And if the power grid goes down, every think tank that's looked at it said we'll probably have a 93% mortality of the population. Guess what the price tag is to harden the grid? $10 billion. Guess who's been opposing it? Never Trumper Republican, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. If I got her name right, I'd have to put the spelling. So this whole never Trumper Republicans, the anti-Trump Democrats. One of the other factors I don't think anybody's got a handle on is Mueller and his team. I did a video some years back of Sidney Powell. She wrote a book called License to Lie. This was about the Mueller team, Weissman, some of the other major players there, and how they took down a major financial institution and caused over thousands of people to lose their jobs. And when the case went to the Supreme Court, it was overturned unanimously because they had there was evidence that they hadn't committed a crime at all, and that was withheld. So Mueller's team, and that includes Comey, the whole bunch there. It's kind of like selective vision. If we're going to look at this whole spectrum here, are we going to look at it honestly, or are we going to select what we're going to look at? And this is what the media has done. They've focused Trump, 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 Trump. My gosh, Hillary, she's committed crimes for which people would spend the rest of their lives in jail, with regard to emails and hard drives and Blackberries and all this stuff. What the heck was going on there? She gets a free ride. Now this brings up, we had an individual come here and speak at this microphone at this meeting, And he basically said he was part of the Irish mob. I'm kind of paraphrasing here so people can get it quickly. He was part of the Irish mob who worked for the Italian mob, who worked for the Jewish mob, who control this country, and nobody up at Hillary's level is ever going to see a day of jail. Which means we don't have a legal system. We do not have a legal system. We have major problems in this country. Again, I've only got 5 minutes to talk, so I'll just say the problem is big money. Big money influences through both parties, and it hits us all at all levels. Even the unions. I've actually gone and I've played my fiddle at union meetings and so forth like that. I support the idea, the concept of unions, but people who've been union members, they say, well, the leadership's all bought out. They're all working for the corporate bosses now. So the unions are really not helping the people. Well, that's going on the Democratic side. So we've got common problems we need to be looking at with a different vision. Thank you.
Well, you know, anyone that's giving a speech here whatsoever, you're not tied to one of the rules of giving a speech is not that you not try to be divisive, things like that. You give your opinion on something and just let the chips fall wherever they may. As far as the intelligence report, you know, not believing it because the CIA said it and using the other false equivalency and analogy, Republicans have reviewed the intelligence report, looked at the sources and said, yes, Russia did interfere in the election, 2016 election for Donald Trump. And I remind you, everybody in the Justice Department that's investigating Donald Trump, they're all Republicans. They were appointed by Jeff Sessions, stepped aside, and Trump beat up on him. No other president has dogged his administration like that. Mueller's a conservative Republican who served in Vietnam, Rosenstein, and the rest of them. You have the president who appointed Whitaker, his buddy, to try and stifle this report, and then Barr is one of them. I could go on and on. It's his Justice Department. It is his administration that started the investigation that's investigating. Furthermore, everything he's facing, he brought on himself. Don't act like he's so dadgum innocent. The way he treats people, the way he talks to people, even in his own administration, he brought it on himself. I mean, nobody else would get by with demeaning women. What he said about Megyn Kelly, I don't apologize for anything that I said about this, just calling a spade a spade. And I'd do the same thing if it was Hillary. And could go on and on about the rebuttal. David K. Johnson has written 2 Pulitzer Prize winning books, have written 2 books on it. I would challenge people to read. I didn't like both of the candidates, the choices we had in 2016 election. They weren't the best. But look at the people who voted for him. Although he beat out 19 other Republicans who had integrity, others from Marco Rubio, John Kasich, about 19 other Republicans he walked through to kind of get the election. So I know I don't have any time. I could easily we could go back and forth on this all day long, but the buck stops at the one who's in the White House. Mexico was supposed to pay for the wall, and now they're not. So much of the stuff our president is facing, he brought on himself, and all of that. Anyway, thank you.
That's good. Wrap it up. Where's